Well, we're talking about home affairs because there are a number of stories that are really related to home affairs that are dominating the newspapers this morning. Of course, the row over non-crime hate incidents continues to roll on, and a new Labour policy to try and stop the boats. Let's explore it all with the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Philp. Chris, thanks so much for joining us this morning. I want to ask first on this bizarre and ongoing story about more and more public figures getting knocks on the door from the police. First, Alison Pearson, now Jermaine Greer, simply for holding, as far as I'm aware, legal opinions.
Yeah, well, good morning. I think it is ridiculous that public figures, journalists, but actually members of the public as well, are getting police attention for essentially expressing opinions. The police should concentrate on crime, genuine crime, not on policing thought. Now, I think if they are going to pay attention to anything that doesn't meet the criminal threshold, that should be an extremely high bar. It should be behaviour which is very likely to lead to imminent criminality, but they should not be policing thought.
But is this not an issue not just of the police, but also of the politicians? After all, it's MPs like yourself who passed the online safety bill, who didn't repeal the 2003 Communications Act, all of these different pieces of legislation that do make opinions that could be seen to be offensive practically illegal.
Well, first of all, the Online Safety Bill, or the Online Safety Act as it now is, was significantly amended, and it now deals with content that is harmful to children, and I'm sure all of us can agree that children should be protected, and it deals with behaviour online that is itself criminal, like organising drug supply or that kind of thing. The Online Safety Act no longer actually deals with adult behaviour falling below the criminal threshold. It was changed, I think, rightly to do that.
Shadow Home Secretary, we have seen many examples of the Communications Act 2003 leading people to face suspended prison sentences for off-colour jokes. We know the famous case of the Scottish man who taught his dog to do a Nazi salute, ended up being dragged through the courts. There was another example of someone who was very disparaging towards the memory of Sir Captain Tom Moore, and said some very awful things about him, but ended up getting a suspended sentence. I mean, these are thought crimes, are they not?
Well, I think you're raising a reasonable point. We should be very careful about where the line is drawn for the criminal law. And these are questions I think that we should take a look at. We should not have the police policing thought crime. And, you know, things should only be illegal where they cause demonstrable harm, like serious harm to others. I'm concerned about the non-crime hate incident category. And in fact, when I was police minister, I actually tightened the rules quite considerably just a few months ago and had plans to tighten them a lot further. And I'm very concerned to hear that Yvette Cooper, the new Home Secretary, is planning or is thinking about scrapping the changes that we introduced a few months ago that effectively raised the threshold for those non-crime hate incidents. Because you're quite right, people, journalists in particular, but the public as well, should not be getting visits from the police in relation to expressing opinions. And sometimes those opinions might be offensive, but we need to be very careful where that criminal line is drawn. And the police, as I say, should be concentrating on acts that are criminal, or if they're not criminal, then very close to the criminal threshold. And there should be, a realistic and immediate chance of criminal behaviour following before the police take action. That is a very high threshold. And in some cases, like the case of, I think it was Julie Bindel, who was approached by the police for commenting on trans issues, in my view, that threshold wasn't met.
It is, of course, the College of Policing that came up with the idea for these so-called non-crime hate incidents back in 2014. It wasn't politicians who legislated for it. Do you think that the College of Policing should be sort of creating new categories of investigation like this, and these rather Orwellian-sounding blots to go on many people's files?
Well, I think we need to look at this Parliament needs to look at this whole issue again and to take control of it, essentially, because it is important. It is infringing on the rights of free citizens and journalists, and we need to make sure the line is drawn in the right place. I think that is something that Parliament should be looking at itself, and we do need to look at moving, I think, where that line is drawn.
That's interesting because, of course, the default answer from many politicians is the police are operationally independent in all of these matters. Do you think there should be some more, perhaps, political control?
Well, of course, not of day-to-day operational matters, no. So when we talk about operational independence, what we mean is that Parliament, acting for the public, set the laws, we set the legislative framework, and then the police apply those laws and act within that framework. That's what operational independence means. And if there are elements of the framework, the laws, the principles, that need to be looked at again, it is perfectly proper, I think, for Parliament to look at that. It is then up to the police to apply that in practice according to their own judgment, and that is what operational independence means.
That's very clear. Now, moving on to small boat arrivals, of course, the government has yet another new plan in terms of trying to stop those boats. It's no longer just smashing the gangs, it's also giving millions of pounds to countries like Vietnam or Turkey to try and stop the flow upstream. Do you think it will work?
Well, look, I'm happy to look at any constructive proposal, but no, I don't think it will work because ultimately you need a deterrent. The National Crime Agency have said you need a deterrent. Martin Hewitt, the government's new border czar, has said you need a deterrent as well. And we had one. We had the Rwanda scheme, but the Labour government scrapped it before it had even started. The first flight was due to take off on the 24th of July, I think, and they scrapped it before it even took off. And because we now have no deterrent, small boat crossings under this Labour government have actually gone up. Now, I believe, had we implemented the deterrent, so if people had crossed the channel, they would rapidly be removed, in this case to Rwanda, but it doesn't really matter where, then that deterrent would have stopped people even attempting the crossings. And I'm not speculating, I know that would have worked. Wait a second, I know that would have worked. No, well, I'm about to say it. No, I don't think it is, because we've seen it work elsewhere.
We've seen Georgia Maloney get struck down by the courts only last week. There is a conspiracy theory that perhaps has a bit of credibility lending to it, that one of the reasons the Prime Minister went so early in that disastrous general election was because he didn't want the embarrassment of yet again courts stopping flights from going to Rwanda.
Yeah, so there's two questions there. Firstly, I think in substance the scheme would have worked in practice because we saw it work in Australia, where they had a similar problem about 10 years ago, and Australia's Operation Sovereign Borders included a deterrent removal scheme. In their case, it was to an island called Nauru. And when we had a returns agreement with Albania, so when people crossed the channel and they got sent quickly back to Albania, we saw the number of crossings go down by 93%. So I think in substance, we know a deterrent works. Now, you asked a different question, which is, would the courts have stopped it? And, I think we passed the Safety of Rwanda Act, which, for example, gave ministers the power to ignore one of these so-called Rule 39 judgments from Strasbourg, which the interim order which they used in the past, and ministers would have had the power to do that. So I think the Rwanda bill could have been probably strengthened a bit, but I think it would have had a very good chance of being effective. And I think if we get back into government, I think one of the components of our plan, not the only component, but one of the components of our plan will be a removal deterrent scheme, because we have seen it work elsewhere. And you know what? Even the European Commission are thinking about it. Ursula von der Leyen, even, the Commission President, was urging member states, European Union member states, to do offshore processing outside the European Union. So even the European Union are looking at doing it. It's just a Labour government here that are too scared to.
OK, well, Chris Philp, Shadow Home Secretary, thank you very much for joining us here on the Camilla Tominey Show this morning. Thank you.